Welcome to part 2 of 10 true horror stories that still haunt people today. Let's get straight into the video. The Enfield Poltergeist. If you've ever watched The Conjuring 2, you've already heard part of this story. But the real case may even be stranger. In 1777, a small council house in Enfield, North London became the center of one of the most investigated paranormal cases in history. It all began when Peggy Hodgson's children complained that their beds were shaking. At first, Peggy assumed they were imagining it. She saw a heavy chest of drawers slide across the room by itself. She immediately called the police. One officer later reported seeing a chair move several feet across the floor without anyone touching it. Soon, the activity escalated. Knocking sounds echoed through the walls almost every single night. Toys flew across the room. Furniture tipped over. Loud bangs shook the house while neighbors gathered outside, too frightened to come in. But the most chilling part involved Peggy's 11-year daughter, Janet. Witnesses claimed Janet levitated from bed on multiple occasions. Photographs appeared to show her suspended in mid-air. Then came the voice. A deep, raspy voice that sounded nothing like an 11-year-old girl began speaking through Janet. It introduced itself as an elderly man who claimed he had died inside the house years earlier. Doctors examined Janet. Psychologists interviewed her. Journalists camped outside the home for months. Researchers from the Society of Psychic Research spent over years documenting the events. Of course, skeptics pointed out that Janet admitted to faking a few incidents for attention, and that's what makes this case so fascinating. Even after removing the events she confessed to staging, investigators were still left with dozens of incidents they couldn't explain. Nearly 50 years later, the Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the world's most debated paranormal mysteries. Was it an elaborate hoax, a frightened family caught in a mass hysteria, or did something truly terrifying live inside that house? No one has ever been able to answer that question with certainty. The Perron family haunting, the real Conjuring house. Most people know The Conjuring as one of the scariest horror movies ever made. But what many don't realize is that it was inspired by a family who insists those terrifying events actually happened. In 1971, Roger and Caroline Perron moved with their 5 daughters into a secluded farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The house was beautiful, old, quiet, exactly the kind of place where you would expect to find peace. Instead, they found fear. The strange events began almost immediately. Brooms disappeared and were later found standing upright in places where no one had left them. Doors opened by themselves. Clocks stopped at exactly the same time every day. The family heard whispers coming from empty rooms. Then the sightings began. The daughters claimed they saw shadowy figures watching them from hallways. Some spirits appeared harmless, others weren't. Caroline reportedly experienced the worst of it. She claimed invisible hands touched her while she slept. She found unexplained bruises covering her body. On several occasions, she said she felt an overwhelming sense of hatred coming from one particular room in the house. As the haunting grew worse, the parents contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren. After investigating, the Warrens believed the family was being terrorized by multiple spirits, including one they identified as Bathsheba Sherman, a woman rumored, though never proven, to have practiced witchcraft during 1800s. During one investigation, the Warrens attempted a seance. According to witnesses, Caroline suddenly began speaking in an unfamiliar voice before collapsing in front of everyone present. The experience frightened Roger Perron so badly that he reportedly demanded the Warrens leave immediately. The family continued living in the house for several more years because they simply couldn't afford to move. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that when night falls, the whispers will start again. The Perron family has never backed away from their story. Some of the daughters continue to share their experiences in interviews even today. And while skeptics argue there's no scientific proof that the haunting occurred, one thing is undeniable. Their story inspired one of the biggest horror franchises in movie history. How much of the film was Hollywood and how much was real? The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel. Some horror stories end with the family moving away. Some end with the ghost disappearing. This one ends with a funeral. In 1975, a 23-year-old woman named Anneliese Michel from Germany became the center of one of the most disturbing and controversial cases in modern history. It didn't begin with paranormal activity. It began with seizures. Anneliese was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy and treated by doctors, but over time, her condition appeared to worsen. According to her family, she started hearing voices that no one else could hear. She claimed she saw terrifying faces around her and believed demonic figures were following her wherever she went. Then her behavior changed dramatically. She reportedly refused to enter churches, She said holy water burned her skin. Religious symbols made her scream in pain. Family members claimed she growled, hissed, and spoke in voices they didn't recognize. Convinced she wasn't suffering from a medical condition alone, her parents turned to the Catholic Church. After months of investigation, two priests were given permission to perform a series of exorcisms. Over the next 10 months, they conducted 67 exorcism sessions. Audio recordings from those sessions still exist today. Even if you're skeptical, they're incredibly unsettling to listen to. You can hear Anneliese screaming, growling, and speaking in ways that many people find difficult to explain. But the ending is heartbreaking. By July 1976, Anneliese had become severely malnourished and physically exhausted. She died at just 23 years old. Her parents and two priests were later found guilty of negligent homicide because they relied on exorcisms instead of continuing medical treatment. To this day, people remain deeply divided over the case. Some believe she was suffering entirely from severe mental illness and neurological disorders. Others believe the recordings and witness accounts point to something science still can't explain. Whatever the truth may be, the story of Anneliese Michel continues to spark debate nearly 50 years later, making it one of the most unsettling cases ever documented. The Amityville Horror. If you've ever walked past a house and thought, I wonder what happened there, the house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York has probably crossed your mind. In 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered 6 members of his family inside the home. The tragedy shocked the entire country. About a year later, George and Kathy Lutz bought the house hoping to start a new chapter in their lives. Instead, they claimed they experienced 28 days of absolute terror. The family reported hearing loud footsteps echoing through empty rooms late at night. Doors slammed shut on their own. Windows opened without anyone touching them. Cold spots appeared throughout the house. George Lutz claimed he woke up every morning at exactly 3:15 a.m., the same time investigators believed that the Feo murders had taken place. As the days passed, George's personality reportedly changed. He became withdrawn, angry, and obsessed with sitting in front of the fireplace for hours at a time, even when the house felt warm. The children claimed they saw frightening figures inside the home. Kathy said she felt invisible hands grabbing her. One daughter even described an imaginary friend she called Jody, whom she claimed appeared as a large creature with glowing red eyes. On the 28th day, the Lutz family fled the house, leaving nearly all of their belongings behind. Their story exploded across newspapers, television, and eventually became one of the most famous horror books and later films ever made. Of course, the Amityville case has been always surrounded by controversy. Many investigators have challenged the family's claims, suggesting the haunting was exaggerated or fabricated. Others insist that while parts of the story may have been embellished, something unusual happened inside that house, whether you believe it or not. The Amityville Horror remains one of the most talked about haunted house cases in history, proving that sometimes the line between truth and legend is impossible to separate. Borley Rectory, England's most haunted house. For our final story, we are going to a place that earned a title a few buildings never have: England's most haunted house. Borley Rectory was built in the 1800s in the quiet countryside of Essex. From the very beginning, strange stories surrounded the property. Locals claimed they had seen the ghost of a nun walking silently across the grounds at dusk. Others reported hearing bells ring when no one was near them. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways. Doors opened and slammed shut on their own. But things became even stranger after Reverend Lionel Foster and his family moved into the rectory during the 1930s. According to the family, objects flew across the rooms without warning. Wine bottles shattered on their own. Heavy furniture moved across the floor. Messages began appearing on the walls, allegedly asking for help. One of the most chilling messages reportedly read, "Marianne, please help me." Family insisted no one had written it. As the news spread, paranormal investigators, journalists, and curious visitors arrived from across Britain. Among them was Harry Bryce, one of the most famous ghost investigators of the 20th century. He spent years documenting reports from the rectory, collecting witness statements, and publishing books that helped cement Borley Rectory's terrifying reputation. Then in 1939, disaster struck. Fire destroyed much of the building. Many believed the haunting had finally come to an end. But even after the ruins were demolished, stories refused to die. Visitors continued reporting ghostly figures wandering the property. Some claimed they still heard footsteps. Others insisted they had seen the mysterious nun crossing the grounds exactly as witnesses described decades earlier. Skeptics argue that Harry Price exaggerated many of the events, while believers insist Borley Rectory was one of the most active paranormal locations ever investigated. The truth may never be known, but nearly a century later, its reputation hasn't faded. Some places disappear, their stories don't. So, what do you think? Were these stories simply the result of fear, coincidence, misunderstood medical conditions, and overactive imaginations? Or do they point to something we still don't understand? Maybe some places really do hold on to the past. Maybe some houses remember the people who once lived there. Or maybe there are things in this world that we are simply not meant to explain. Whatever you believe, one thing is certain. These stories have survived for decades because the people involved never stopped insisting they were real. If this video kept you looking over your shoulder, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to Voices from the Dark, and let me know in the comments which story disturbed you the most and which one do you think was actually real. Until next time, sleep well because sometimes the scariest stories are the true ones.